Welcome to Bach 101, an introduction to the music of Johann Sebastian Bach, a presentation of Music Worcester. I'm your host, Dr. Chris Shepard, the Artistic Director of The Complete Bach. Now, let's talk Bach. Welcome back to Bach 101. Today, we finish the conversation that we started about the concerto in the previous episode. Last time, I had to give a great deal of background information and define the meaning of the word ritornello with its three sections: the Vordersatz, or front phrase, the Fortspinnung, or the spinning fourth, and the epilogue, the closing, the summing up section. Today is all about music. Yes, I'll have to go back and remind us of how those ritornelli are constructed, but that is only so that we can experience it as we listen to Bach's concerto for two harpsichords, BWV 1060. We are lucky to be able to use the recording made in the first year of The Complete Bach with harpsichordists Ian Watson and John McKean alongside the Handel Haydn Society. First, let me deconstruct the material from that opening ritornello. Remember that it always opens with the main theme, in German the Vordersatz, or the front phrase. But really, we only need to think of it as the melody. This melody is a combination of slurred eighth notes that are far apart, and then a little scale. So the leaps, scale. So that's really just the opening melody. Now do keep in mind these slurs, dia, dia, dum, dia, 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 dum. The idea of slurring is going to be really important in this piece, in this movement. Now, listen to what Bach does next. It certainly is economical. Let me start at the beginning. The next phrase. As you can hear, it's the exact same as the first phrase, just sequenced up. This is what I mean when I say that Bach's music is coherent and efficient. He creates a balanced four-bar phrase by using the same material as its own question and answer. Now, incidentally, when we refer to that opening material, it's not really a full phrase. It is what is known as a motto, or in Italian, motto, M-O-T-T-O. This Italian word originally meant a word or a saying, and this musical subphrase becomes essential to the way that the music unfolds in Bach, whether it's a fugue or concerto or any other form. So I will often refer to that not as a theme, but as a motto, part of a theme. Okay, let's listen up to that point, those first four measures, now played by H&H and their two wonderful harpsichordists. Do you remember that wonderful German word that I loved so much? It's Fortspinnung, which just means the spinning forth of musical material that follows the opening theme or motto. True to its name, Bach simply spins out new lines, particularly through the use of sequences. Now, one of the reasons I chose this concerto is that the ritornello is quite short, which means that the Fortspinnung is really compact. That's the Fortspinnung here. And it's really just sequences. Lower, lower, and then in fact he even spins off in a slightly different direction from there. So remember, The three sections of the ritornello are the opening theme, the Fortspinnung, and then the epilogue, which is simply the ending of the section, a cadence that returns us to the original key. Here is the epilogue of this ritornello, again, really short. A cadence is really just the ending of a paragraph, a little phrase to close it up. So he comes out of this sequencing of the Fortspinnung, and it gets us back to the original key, that C minor. Okay, now that I've presented all of that material, let's go back to H&H and hear the whole opening ritornello. Ian Watson, John McKean on harpsichords and the Handel and Haydn Society. Always keep in mind that the ritornello has a few different purposes. It is certainly the opening statement, and it is very rare in the Baroque period to have a concerto that doesn't begin with a full ritornello. It is also the source of the musical material that will be explored throughout the whole movement. As you'll see in a moment, you definitely do get new material, particularly for the soloists, but there will often be a whiff of the material from the ritornello, an echo of what has been introduced. And finally, statements from the ritornello, or even the full ritornello itself, serve as signposts throughout the movement, orienting us and reorienting us, even as the soloists go off in their own tangential, adventurous directions. That idea of ritornello as pillar is especially important at the end, since you will almost always find a full restatement of the ritornello to round out the form of the movement. Okay, having disposed of the opening ritornello, we can now enter into the meat of what we find in any concerto, the section where the composer focuses primarily on the soloists, using the rest of the orchestra, referred to as the ripieno, as a complement. Incidentally, I love the fact that the literal translation of the word ripieno in Italian is stuffing or padding, so that in that sense, the orchestra provides padding for the soloists. This is what the second harpsichord plays at the start of the first big solo section. As you will hear, these slurred eighth notes are very reminiscent of the slurred notes from the beginning. Remember I said how important they would be? And even these little ones, dia, 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 da, are slurred, so they come in pairs. This is what the second harpsichord plays in this solo section. We can see that comes directly. The idea is so related to the slurs in that opening motto. What does the first harpsichord play against the second harpsichord? We might refer to this sort of figuration as simply virtuosic, soloistic material. It's not that it's extraordinarily difficult to play, although it's not easy, but rather that it seems to fulfill the function of allowing the soloist to show off a little bit. So this is the first harpsichord part. And with the left hand, that wonderful dee-da-da-dum, dee-da-da-da. In a little bit, you're going to see how often Bach uses something called an ostinato, a repeating rhythmic pattern. Ba-da-da-dum, ba-da-da-dum. And particularly when it is off the beat, when it's syncopated. And he does this because it creates rhythmic interest and excitement. Incidentally, because this is a double concerto, meaning a concerto for two instruments, Bach will always present material first in one harpsichord and then later in the other. This is actually quite good for us to hear, because Bach's most famous concerti are the Brandenburg Concerti. They are each a concerto grosso, which means a concerto for a group of instruments. The interplay between two or more different instruments is a fundamental aspect of Bach's approach to the concerto grosso, which was especially popular during Bach's lifetime, even over the solo concerto. We've looked at the two soloists, but what does the orchestra do while the two harpsichords have their solo parts? Well, this is where the idea of a ripieno as filling or padding comes in. Bach marks their music piano, and it's just chords on quarter notes in the background. And then they jump in with a little bit of syncopation. So with the cellos, and it's not even chords, it's just unison C, although at some point that will be chords. This means that the soloist can always be heard above the orchestra once those soloistic sections start. But remember what I said about the ritornello acting as signpost and orienter throughout? After 4 measures of soloistic trading between the harpsichords, this is what the entire ensemble plays together. Yeah, that's right. It's simply the motto from the very beginning. And then the two harpsichords continue in their own dialogue, which you will hear in a moment. This entire section is so typical of concertos by Johann Sebastian Bach, especially those extremely famous 6 Brandenburg Concerti. You don't go very long without catching a glimpse of material from the opening ritornello, but then spinning off in a new direction for the soloists. Let me play for you the H&H recording, beginning with the solo section that I just described a moment ago. To remind you, the second harpsichord is playing material based on those slurs, while the first harpsichord plays more virtuosic 16th notes. And then you will have interruptions of the original motto before spinning off in new directions. But the musical material remains consistent throughout, and you will hear little snippets of the material from that opening motto. This concerto is an especially economical example in that sense. You really don't have to go many measures without hearing something familiar, which is why it is such a wonderful movement for us to listen to together. I'm going to go far enough so that you can really hear that kind of interplay before coming back to introduce one other idea. So again, Ian, John, and the H&H players. Although you actually know enough now to listen in an informed way to this whole movement, I wanted to point out 2 more things, just to show you how many techniques a creative composer like Bach has at his disposal. I want to pick up where we just left off in the H&H recording. Let me play for you what happens next. It is somehow at once inevitable, but still surprising. Here it is. That's exactly right. Although this is a movement in C minor, Bach transposes and really transforms that opening ritornello material by making it major. All of a sudden, it feels like the sun has come out. This is very typical of minor key movements. There will almost always be a moment where they go into a major key, although they will have to go home eventually, back to that minor key. I also wanted to show you one more little bit of the soloist's dialogue. In this next section, he again refers obliquely to material from the ritornello, but goes in different directions. Listen to what the second harpsichord plays. I think he's referring back to that opening with the slurred eighths. He doesn't mark these as slurred, but those eighth note pairs. We get them here, D, da, 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 da. This time they're simply eighth notes in a motoric repetition, like an ostinato. But quite cleverly, Bach puts them against the strong beats, creating a bit of syncopation and rhythmic interest. Listen when I put it into rhythmic and metrical context. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. When you hear this later, you will get a sense of excitement and activity from this particular section. The orchestra is doing something very similar to what it did last time, but again, they add to the syncopation. That 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So against the second harpsichord, 1, 2, harpsichord, orchestra. And now the first harpsichord part feels even more virtuosic than it did earlier. With those running sixteenths and arpeggios. By the way, keep in mind that the first harpsichord is not more important or more virtuosic than the second. You can count on the fact that this will be flipped at some point. It is almost as if both players had an agent who carefully negotiated with Bach for equal playing time. Or, given the nature of brothers from Cain and Abel on, it feels a little bit like Bach wanted to make sure that his sons didn't fight over whose solo part was more important. Now, let's listen to that little section played by H&H, beginning with that E-flat major, sunny moment. I will go further along and you will see how Bach keeps using that opening motto and moving it from key to key, sometimes major, sometimes minor. Well, I think we have covered enough of this in detail that you can now hear the whole movement for yourself. Let me play that entire first movement of the Concerto for two harpsichords in C minor, BWV 1060, played by Ian Watson and John McKean with the Handel Haydn Society players. I think that you know enough about the architecture of this movement to be able to sense where you are at all times. Keep in mind that this sense of architecture and keeping one's bearings was an essential part of the concerto style. Here we go. Incidentally, you may recognize this music from a different concerto. This work actually began its life a decade or more earlier as a concerto for violin and oboe. When Bach took over the Collegium Musicum in Leipzig, he reworked a number of concerti from earlier in his life so that he and his sons would have some multiple 2, 3, or 4 harpsichord concerti to play together. That reconstructed concerto in D minor for violin and oboe, the original is not survived, but editors can surmise enough to reconstruct it, is better known. But I still think that the vitality of the harpsichord version is very exciting. So with that, we draw to a close our 2-episode discussion of the concerto. My suggestion to you now is to listen to those wonderful 6 Brandenburg concerti, themselves a universe of musical ideas and technical mastery. Always keep in mind that there's really only a proper melody at the start of a concerto. Once the soloists start to do their thing, phrases are fragmented in order to be handed off from one player to another in short bursts of imitation and sequence. But there will always be intimations of that opening theme, that motto, and Bach will tend to return to them throughout the solo sections to remind us of that opening, and then always pull everything together at the end by reasserting that opening ritornello. Thank you for being with me for this discussion of the concerto, and I look forward to our next Bach 101 when we can continue to delve into this remarkable music. Thanks.